Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. Now let's talk about Isaiah 5, but the true version of it. The word Israel is a play on words for Israel, and the I can become a Y to make two words, YS as wise, and the second word real. The wise is the real. And the wise man looks at this situation on this planet. What does he ascertain? When he's trying to figure it out, what does he see in his wisdom, in his natural vision, his supernatural vision, if you will? Well, long ago, a man had a family. Before people migrated out of Africa, a man had a family. An Ethiopian-like family is what the evidence suggests. They looked a bit different than Ethiopians look today, a bit different than everybody. They're a very early family. And as they started figuring out together why they're here, a champion of God started to emerge. This caused division. Some people were worried about how things were going to be distributed, how respect and mating would be assigned. Various models were run, various activities occurred, some of them treacherous. People began to form clans and tribes and groups, which over thousands of years would develop into cult centers in Egypt, and it would spill over into the Middle East, into a place right by Egypt called Canaan, which would eventually be taken by a group of people. And that group of people was not the chosen of God. That group of people would be the main people who control the narrative on this planet. The history books. Them and their allies in Europe. This is key in the human story. The greatest warriors who are the most loyal to God would branch out and move toward various places, but they would wind up in the heart of Africa, in the heart of the motherland, the mother of all races, the birthplace of humanity. They'd wind up in the heart of it, in a place that would eventually be known as Nigeria and Biafra. As people moved around the world as a result of this ancient rift, this ancient disagreement, it wasn't one camp versus another. There was many different factions. There were many factions, many peoples, and they started to change relative to the decisions that they made. The great warriors had beautiful women, arguably the most beautiful women on the planet, right there in the heart of Nigeria. And over time, peoples tried to take their women and they fought them and they killed them. Eventually, God sent a test on the top martial arts, line, and his soldiers, who were like angels. Angels that work angles out of wisdom, insight, discernment, sense. Eventually the colonists would come, the 1400s or 1500s. And in the process, they would unfairly distribute power. Unwittingly or otherwise, they would find the top martial arts line and assign them a certain amount of power, because some people from their line were very ambitious, etc. Scrambling to salvage the situation. But because of the nature of the colonists and their wicked schemes, their mocking, their plans, they would empower a lot of the enemies of the top martial arts line. And in a situation where they didn't have complete power to begin with, as far as anyone could tell, they started losing more power. And women were started being taken more and more. Now there was a lot less of them. They were taken overseas. They were killed. Millions of them were said to have died on the way to America. One number I've heard is that 20 million slaves died on the voyage to America and were thrown overboard. That most of the slaves, the captured people rather, who were taken to America, died on the way there. They were raped and abused and tortured in various ritual manners. And those traitors among them who were more inclined toward evil, they made an unholy alliance with these colonial oppressors. Eventually, after the slave process had finished, because the top martial arts line had a natural and lethal grace to emerge in a certain way, so that line was not captured by the slave traders and their allies in Nigeria, in Calabar, on the coast of West Africa, what have you. They would call the slave trade the transatlantic slave trade, crossing the big ocean into North and South America. Eventually, the most gifted of the martial artist line, who was alive at the time, found his way to America. Worked his way up penniless to being a brain surgeon, which was basically seen as the most difficult job to attain. He married a woman who was white, was a colonial woman. Right? She's from the colonial race, rather. And they had 3 children in the most populated state in America, called California. And last of all, God sent his son, who was the middle son, after all the treachery had taken place. Generations of rebellion forged the masses of people, including the vast majority of people in Africa. And those who didn't rebel a long time ago, in the last 40, 50, 60 years or so, they rebelled, becoming opportunists, taking on the ways of foreigners and their spirits and their leaders and their customs and their cultures and their idols, taking on the ways that they never knew, selling out God Almighty, as over the years they drifted more and more away from the martial art core. The colonists, as you would expect, had their own religious narrative and books. People foreign to the martial art order came up with the Abrahamic faiths, and in their tradition they coded the truth into their stories. Abraham, champion Ham. Ham begot Mizraim, Egypt, Cush, Sudan, and southern Egypt, and beyond, going south and west and southwest. The White Nile, the Blue Nile, more than Ethiopia and Uganda, all of Africa, extending into the Middle East, into Canaan, all considered part of Ham. These people wrote themselves, or rather wrote a story about themselves, like people all over the world did. But when God sent his son to give the world one last chance, they teamed up with the rest of the world and refused to publicly declare God's son the Messiah. Let's briefly go back to the beginning again. Long ago, a man had a family in Ethiopia, what have you. And they spread around the world for the reasons I discussed earlier. The flesh of my flesh, the blood